Prussian Potsdam Model 1809 musket. The Potsdam line had been the Prussian infantry's anchor since the early 18th century, and by the Napoleonic period, the service arm centered on the Model 1809. It arrived as Prussia rebuilt after the 1806 to 1807 disasters and equipped the reformed army that fought from 1813 through Waterloo. Earlier M1723 and M17-40 patterns lingered at the margins, but the 1809 became the workhorse in Blücher's ranks. Its ancestry traces back to the M1723 and M1740 land pattern muskets. The 1809 borrowed heavily from the French 1777 concept, moving from pinned barrels to 3 bands and embracing simplified fittings that made wartime assembly faster. Later, large stocks went through caplock conversion programs in the 1830s, a path labeled M18-31 in period sources. Mechanically, it was a flintlock smoothbore of about 71 caliber with a barrel a little over 41 inches. The front sight was cast into the forward band rather than the barrel, an unusual detail that turns up on surviving examples. Steel bands replaced earlier brass furniture on the forend to save cost and time, while the walnut stock and brass butt plate remained orthodox. The protected priming pan and the often seen heart-shaped cutout in the cock give the pattern an immediately recognizable silhouette. Larger bores made it possible to load captured British or French cartridges when supply chains thinned. Undersized French balls in the 71 bore could rattle down the barrel and lose accuracy. But the flexibility helped keep firing lines alive. The switch to steel bands, parts commonality with earlier Potsdams, and straightforward locks allowed output to climb quickly by 1813 to 1815. After the wars, many flintlocks were converted to percussion and later sold abroad, which is why Potsdams reappear in mid-19th century conflicts far from Prussia. French Charleville musket model 17-77. French infantry standardization begins in 1717 and marches through successive patterns to the Model 17-77 and its Year 9 revision, the versions most associated with Revolutionary and Napoleonic armies. Those muskets armed line battalions and light companies across the coalitions, while sister designs circulated in allied and client states. The lineage runs Model 17-17 to 1728, where 3 bands become a French hallmark through the heavier 1763, the lightened 1766, and the incremental 1770s adjustments that culminate in the 1777 and Corrigé en l'an 9 update. The 69 caliber concept remained constant, paired with an undersized ball to keep fouling manageable in long strings of fire. A typical infantry 1777 measures roughly 60 inches overall, with a 45-inch barrel and weighs around 10 pounds. The barrel is held by 3 bands. The front sight is part of the upper band. The lock is a flint mechanism whose fixtures and pans vary slightly across runs and arsenals, such as Charleville, Maubeuge, Toul, and Saint-Étienne. Stocks were walnut, with furniture depending on variant dragoon, artillery, and naval versions carried their own mixtures of iron and brass. The same smoothbore equipped skirmishers who took advantage of cover and aimed fire more often than line units, which shows how doctrine, not just hardware, shaped battlefield use. Bayonets remained integral to tactics as formations closed. French state manufacturing ran at continental scale. Across all Charleville family variants, the total approaches the multi-million mark. The banded construction simplified depot work, and wartime adjustments kept the pattern serviceable through campaigns from Italy to Spain. The design seeded copies and inspired national patterns abroad. And in North America, the Model 1766 path fed directly into the Springfield Model 1795, a connection still visible when the two are set side by side. British Brown Bess India pattern. The India pattern grew from East India Company procurement needs and became the British Army's mainline musket through the Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars. It equipped troops from the Peninsular campaigns to the Waterloo Line, and it sailed with the Royal Navy and colonial garrisons across the empire. Its roots lie in the earlier long and short land patterns. Wartime demand drove a simplification in the 1790s that trimmed the barrel to 39 inches and eased production. The Board of Ordnance drew on a wide contractor network, and the India pattern quickly eclipsed earlier Bess variants in number. This 75 caliber flintlock carried a simple front sight that doubled as a bayonet lug, brass furniture, and a walnut stock. Overall length was about 55 inches, with weight just under 10 pounds in many examples. The triangular socket bayonet was part of the package, and the musket proved content to operate in mud, rain, and tropical heat when maintained to regulation. Period trials in London captured the practical accuracy roughly half of aimed shots, found a 6-foot target at 100 yards, with diminishing returns out to 300. The pattern's virtue lay in rugged predictability, a trait that fit British volley doctrine. After the wars, large numbers went to colonies or underwent flint to percussion conversions, ensuring service lives that stretched well into the 19th century. The procurement approach, semi-standardized parts across many contractors, formed an early chapter in an industrial story that led eventually to the P-53 Enfield rifle musket. Austrian Model 17-98. Austria's Model 17-98 arrived after hard lessons in the wars of the French Revolution. Vienna convened a commission to modernize the linearm, and the new musket drew on French 1777 practice while retaining Austrian preferences in fittings and bayonet mounting. Earlier patterns from 1767, 1774, and 1784 form the lead-up. The 1798-99 version narrows the bore to about 17.5 mm, adopts a conical touch hole rather than the earlier self-priming bridge, and keeps a stout one-piece walnut stock aimed at bayonet work. The lock follows the 1777 geometry, but with Austrian execution, and the ramrod is thick and cylindrical, so it doesn't need twisting as it goes down the bore. Barrel length sits near 44 inches with smoothbore construction. Furniture mixes steel and brass. The finish on metal parts often appears as a darker gray, the result of heat treatment intended to control rust and reduce cleaning time. The bayonet uses a 4-edged profile and a spring catch attachment that is quick to fix. In use, soldiers reported reliable sparks and low misfire rates. The heavier build cost endurance on long marches compared to French arms, but it returned dividends in durability. The separate priming step on the conical vent slowed untrained recruits until drill caught up. The War Ministry centralized standards and inspections, yet still relied on artisan workshops across the empire, which affected interchangeability but kept output flowing. The 1798-99's features fed into the Model 1807 and then into percussion conversions of the 1840s and 1850s, a bridge that kept earlier smoothbores relevant until rifle muskets replaced them. Russian Model 1808. Russia pursued standardization just as Napoleon's armies pressed east. The Model 1808, usually associated with Tula, but also produced at Izhevsk and Sestroretsk, was a close copy of the French 1777, particularly the Year 9 revision. It became the most unified smoothbore in Russian hands during the 1812 to 1815 campaigns. Development followed captured and imported French examples, with Russian engineers adopting the general scheme while adjusting furniture and lock details to local practice. The brass pan sits slightly higher. The fittings are lighter than on French pieces, and the cock has the ring nose profile seen on A9 locks. Specifications and period references give a caliber around 70, with a smooth barrel of about 45 inches. The 3 barrel bands and much of the furniture are brass. The butt plate often bears the imperial eagle. Weight hovers near 9 3/4 pounds without the bayonet attached. A front blade sight is the only sighting aid, as is normal on smoothbores. Contemporary remarks point to effective range inside 100 meters in routine use, with higher short bursts possible when drill sacrificed aim. Quality varied by arsenal during wartime pressure, and damp weather behavior compared unfavorably to British locks, though the underlying 1777 type mechanism remained straightforward to service. Russia began the 1812 campaign with dozens of calibers still in circulation. The 1808 helped push toward a single 1778mm standard, while stopgaps armed battalions with captured French and imported Prussian or Austrian muskets. Many 1808s later converted to percussion and filtered to reserve and provincial units. Some persisted long enough to be replaced only when newer percussion arms arrived in quantity. Bavarian infantry musket. The Bavarian infantry musket sits within the same architectural family that spread across German states in the Napoleonic era. Contemporary descriptions in the source place it alongside the Potsdam 1809 concept, with a three-band arrangement and a flintlock of the familiar continental profile. Its role was to arm Bavarian formations that fought as part of French coalitions, and its adoption reflects the pull of French 1777-style solutions across Central Europe. The stock lines, banded barrel, and bayonet mounting follow the period pattern. Weight, length, and smoothbore performance align with the general run of late 18th century infantry muskets. Surviving documentation can blur it with Prussian production, which is unsurprising given shared ideas and subcontracting habits among regional arsenals. What matters in the field is that Bavarian troops drilled with a musket that behaved like its Prussian and French peers at volley distances, produced with the same goal of getting a reliable flintlock into line quickly. Swedish land pattern musket. Sweden's defeats in 1808 to 1809 and the loss of Finland forced a rapid rebuild of arms stocks. Aid from Britain filled immediate gaps, and a smaller caliber national pattern introduced in 1811 took final shape in the model 1815, which served as the baseline Swedish flintlock after the Napoleonic period. The design drew from French practice, yet followed Swedish preferences. The source notes a shift to about 18.55mm, and the 1815 carried a stock with a cheek cavity. Subsequent adjustments included a brief move to brass pans before returning to iron, and by 1838, a dovetailed rear sight appears on updated patterns. Two reparation builds combined older Swedish and foreign locks and stocks into standardized line arms, a pragmatic response to budget and inventory. Ignition remained the standard flint arrangement, with iron fittings that fit the northern climate and service philosophy. While formal Swedish range and rate of fire figures are not given in the material, Norwegian experience with a close copy, the 1825 records, complaints about recoil and stock strength, which in turn drove local reinforcement and lock changes in 1829 and 1834. The 1815's importance goes beyond the units that carried it. Norway, newly linked to Sweden in 1814, built the 1825 after the Swedish pattern, then refined it with a rounded lock plate and altered mainspring geometry influenced by British practice. Sweden began converting its own 1815s to percussion in the 1840s. The result is a Nordic modernization chain that starts with this flintlock and proceeds through conversion, rifling, and eventually to breech loading systems later in the century. Danish to Norwegian infantry musket. Kiel's 1794 musket marks Denmark to Norway's modernization just before the Napoleonic storm. It was a flintlock smoothbore built to load quickly in line service and to handle bayonet fighting with efficient fittings. A short 1808 conversion of the 1794 trimmed overall length for specific troops while keeping the same operating ideas. Kiel's technical choices were practical. A conical touch hole allowed a trace of the main charge to self-prime the pan, trimming a step in the reload sequence. A pan screen kept sparks and blast out of the neighboring man's face in close order files. The bayonet used a spring catch for fast fixing and removal. The barrel was retained by sliders instead of pins, and the trigger guard was reshaped for drills. The standard musket ran to about 142 centimeters in length. The MO 1808 was about 15 centimeters shorter. Source material centers on how quickly a drilled file could load and how safely the weapon behaved in a dense rank, rather than on raw accuracy numbers. The design is clearly shaped by line of battle ergonomics. Few 1794s appear to have been converted into the 1808 configuration, making the shortened pattern scarce in Norway today. The program nonetheless points directly to the follow-on inside lock M1807 concept that focused on weather protection and maintenance simplicity. Together, the Danish to Norwegian muskets show a national path that emphasized practical improvements in drill, safety, and service convenience, rather than wholesale imitation of foreign locks. Spanish Model 1752 musket. Spain's Model 1752 brought nationwide standardization to an empire that had leaned on regional patterns and contract guns. It armed the Spanish army and colonial formations through the Peninsular War and continued in service deep into the independence struggles across the Americas. Its development reflects local traditions. The musket used the Spanish Miquelet lock, a flint mechanism with an external mainspring and geometry that produced a strong spark and tolerated humidity and dust well. Caliber sat near 69 in common references, and the barrel ran about 43 inches. Stocks were walnut with brass furniture, 2 bands, a nose cap, and ramrod pipes define the profile. A simple front sight often appears cast with the forward band. Soldiers valued spark reliability in damp climates, even as the pattern's weight and maintenance quirks drew complaints. Wartime shortages in the Peninsular campaigns triggered hybrid repairs and mixed parts. Colonial distribution meant local armories improvised to keep units armed. The musket served in the Caribbean, in Spain's North African ventures, and across Latin America. Many later went through percussion conversions for mid-19th century conflicts, such as the Carlist Wars. Museums in Madrid and Toledo, and collections in the United States, preserve Miquelet locked examples, including pieces linked to Spanish aid shipments to the American Revolution. Thule musket. Thule's armory, active from the late 17th century, produced hunting guns for trade and naval muskets that predate and then overlap the standardized Charleville line. The source material places these common and marine patterns in service from the 1690s through 1815, so stocks persisted into Revolutionary and Napoleonic inventories, even as later models became the norm. The evolution starts with early fusils de chasse and fusils de traite for colonial trade. By 1717, France formalized a service musket that still shows Thule's upstream influence. Early common muskets used pinned barrels, plug bayonets, and wooden ramrods. Over the first half of the 18th century, those features migrated to socket bayonets and metal rods, while calibers clustered around 62 for trade guns and about 69 for later military issues labeled 18 to the pound. Technically, they are flintlock smoothbores with long barrels often in the mid-40s of inches and simple front sights. Furniture could be iron or brass, depending on contract and purpose. Locks are frequently marked tool older pieces read TVIL, a detail that complicates archaeological categorization because trade, hunting, and naval patterns share markings. The length and front sight offered modest practical accuracy, and the overall reach made sense when bayonets closed. Archaeology at Fort St. Joseph in Michigan and a French shipwreck from 1760 attest to the export and naval use of these arms, which helps explain their survival in inventories that reached into the Napoleonic years. The tool patterns feed directly into the standardized French family. They show the transition from pin to banded retention, from wooden to metal ramrods, and from plug to socket bayonets. That arc sets the stage for the Charleville models that came to define French service later in the 18th century. And that's all for this video. If you liked it, feel free to share it with other firearm enthusiasts. And if there's a particular topic you'd want explored next, sound off in the comments. Thanks for watching.